Why did everyone laugh when she stepped into the sandpit? The morning sun cut across the naval training grounds, bouncing off the waves beyond the wire fence. Recruits had already lined up, their boots heavy in the loose grit, their eyes sharper than their tired bodies. But when she appeared, smaller frame, hair tied back, uniform hanging a little loose, the chuckles spread before she'd even spoken. Boot camp was merciless to anyone who stood out, and she stood out in every way. Her name was Reyes. No one cared to ask her first name. To them, she was just the girl in a place where muscle, sweat, and bravado ruled. SEAL candidates weren't supposed to look like her, slim, almost delicate. She carried herself quietly, too, which only made it worse. Silence in the barracks was taken as weakness. Silence in the Chow line was seen as fear. They mocked her, not with words at first, but with glances, smirks, exaggerated stretches when she ran past them. When she fell behind on the obstacle course, they clapped sarcastically, shouting encouragement that was really insult. And yet she never broke. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was armor. Every slight, every laugh, every muttered word that she didn't belong, she gathered them, stored them somewhere deep, letting them burn like slow fire. The instructors noticed. Not all, but one in particular. Commander Harlow. Broad shoulders, years of combat operations behind him, eyes that didn't miss details. He watched her with the same expression he gave every recruit, stone-hard, unreadable. But there was something different in his pauses, almost like he was waiting. That day the sandpit test was simple but brutal. Endless push-ups, burpees, crawls, and carries under the weight of logs. Sweat-drenched uniforms, sand clung to skin, and tempers broke faster than bodies. One by one, recruits slowed, stumbled, cursed. She kept moving. Quiet, steady, almost eerie in her refusal to quit. That was when it happened. She pulled off her jacket mid-drill, sleeves rolled high because of the heat. For the first time, the mark on her arm caught the light. Ink. Black, bold, nothing fancy. Just a tattoo etched deep, half hidden by sweat and grit. The moment Harlow saw it, he froze. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a unit crest, one that shouldn't have existed anymore. A viper coiled around 5 stars. His breath caught in a way recruits never saw from him. He'd seen that mark before. Long ago, carved into skin of people who weren't supposed to survive. A classified program. Ghosts from wars that had never made it to the newspapers. The laughter around the pit didn't stop. The recruits hadn't noticed the tattoo. They kept jeering, louder now, sensing weakness where none existed. "Sand Princess," one yelled. "Gonna quit yet," another barked, coughing through his exhaustion. But Harlow wasn't laughing. He stepped forward, boots sinking in the sand, and stared at her arm like he'd seen an apparition. Who was she? Reyes felt his eyes but didn't flinch. She just kept moving, muscles trembling, lungs burning, but her face steady as stone. She knew what they thought of her. She knew every laugh was a challenge, and still, she chose silence. What none of them knew, not yet, was that silence wasn't her weakness. It was her shield. That night in the barracks, the mocking continued. Someone had slipped sand into her sheets. Another had scrawled "tourist" on her locker with chalk. The others laughed, pretending it was harmless fun. She didn't react. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, letting the voices blur into static. But inside, she wasn't calm. She was remembering the man who told her once, "Never waste breath on proving yourself. Time will do it for you." Her father's voice. Gone now, buried under the weight of classified missions no one in this camp would ever hear about. He had carried that same tattoo, and when he died, she had carried the weight of his silence too. Commander Harlow sat in his office long after lights out, files spread before him. He flipped through Reyes' record again and again. Clean, too clean, academic scores, physical trials, psychological resilience, nothing unusual but the tattoo. That tattoo wasn't in the record. He leaned back in his chair, shadows from the desk lamp cutting across his face. Memories clawed their way out of the dark, Berlin rooftops, Moscow safe houses, faces of people who had worn that same viper mark. People who weren't supposed to exist anymore. He had buried those memories with whiskey, with time, with silence. And now here it was, on the arm of a recruit half his age. The next morning, drills began before sunrise. The cold bit harder than the day before, the waves crashing louder against the shore. Recruits lined up, shivering, still half asleep. The instructors barked orders, voices sharp against the dawn. Reyes stood among them, posture straight, eyes forward. No smile, no complaint. The jeers came again. Someone muttered about her hair being out of regulation. Another joked that she'd never last hell week. The chorus of laughter spread, echoing in the gray light. She ignored them, she always ignored them, but Harlow couldn't, not now. He barked silence, the tone so sharp even the most arrogant recruits snapped to attention. The air thickened. For the first time since she'd arrived, Reyes wasn't the one under scrutiny. Harlow's gaze swept the line, then settled on her. His voice dropped low, almost dangerous. Reyes stepped forward. The recruits shifted, smirks tugging at their lips. They expected a public dressing down. Maybe he'd send her packing. Maybe the experiment of letting a woman into their ranks would end today. Reyes stepped forward, calm, silent. Harlow's eyes flicked just for a second to the ink on her arm, then back to her face. He didn't ask about her performance, didn't ask about her silence. He just asked one question, the one burning hole in his chest since yesterday. "Who are you?" The recruits blinked. Confusion rippled through the line. The question made no sense. She was just another candidate, wasn't she? But Reyes didn't answer. She stood there, expression unreadable, shoulders squared. The silence stretched, heavy as lead. Harlow broke it with a command, "Back in line." The drills continued, sweat pouring, muscles screaming. But every recruit now carried a different tension. They'd seen their commander shaken, even if just for a moment. And they'd seen Reyes stand there, unflinching, under a question that no one else understood. The mocking didn't stop that day, but it was weaker, less certain. Something about her had shifted in their eyes, not respect, not yet, but curiosity. Because now they wondered too. Who was she? And why did their commander, a man who had stared down death more times than they could count, look at her like she was a ghost? Why didn't she answer? The recruits talked about it all day. Not out loud, not where the instructors could hear, but in the chow line during the march, in whispers under their breath. Reyes had been called forward, stared down by Commander Harlow himself, and when asked who she was, she'd said nothing. Silence where most would have begged for mercy. Silence where most would have crumbled under pressure. It rattled them. By evening, their curiosity twisted into resentment. If she thought she was better than them, she'd pay for it. That night, they filled her boots with water, laced them tight, and left them by her bunk. Petty, childish, but in a place like this, cruelty was currency. She found them before morning formation, poured out the water without a word, slipped them on, still damp, and marched, not a flicker of reaction. The laughter echoed behind her, but she didn't break, not even when the blisters opened, not even when blood mixed with water and stained her socks. The next obstacle course came brutal and fast, cargo nets slick with rain, walls too high for small hands, rope climbs that shredded palms. Men twice her weight leapt ahead, pulling themselves up with raw muscle. She lagged, she slipped, she fell twice, and every time the chorus of jeers grew louder. But she never stopped. When she reached the wall again, mud smeared across her face, she locked her eyes on the top and climbed, inch by inch, slow, steady, teeth clenched against pain. She didn't look down, she didn't look at them. She just climbed until her fingers gripped the ledge and she pulled herself over. By the time she landed on the other side, the laughter had faltered. She wasn't fast, she wasn't flashy, but she was relentless. Commander Harlow watched from the tower. He'd seen arrogance crumble in weeks. He'd seen giants quit halfway, But this girl, this Reyes, she absorbed punishment like stone absorbs rain. Quiet, patient, unyielding. And still that tattoo. When the course ended, Harlow returned to his office. He locked the door, opened the restricted personnel files, and searched again. Her record was ordinary, too ordinary. Every SEAL candidate left a trail: commendations, reprimands, psych evals, red flags. Hers was spotless. That wasn't possible. Then he saw it, a line most wouldn't notice. Emergency contact, classified, not a family member, not even next of kin. Just a black bar, redacted. His chest tightened. He knew that level of redaction. He'd only seen it for people buried in programs the government refused to admit existed. His hands trembled as he closed the file. He stared at the wall, memories bleeding through. Years ago in Moscow, he'd seen a man die wearing that same tattoo. A man who'd saved his life and told him never to speak of it. A man whose name had been erased from records just like Reyes. Was it possible? Could she be his daughter? The thought chilled him more than the rain pounding the window. Meanwhile, in the barracks, Reyes sat alone on her bunk, stitching her torn sock with a needle she kept hidden in her kit. She worked quietly while the others bragged about times and numbers, about how many they'd beaten, about how soon she'd quit. But inside, she wasn't thinking of them. She was thinking of her father. He told her stories in fragments, never in whole. Fragments about men who lived in shadows, about missions no one admitted, about choices that left scars no metal could heal. He'd told her once as he traced the tattoo on his own arm, "This isn't for glory. This is a reminder of what we lost, of what we became to survive." She hadn't understood then, but when she buried him, she did. And when she inked that same mark into her skin, she wasn't copying him. She was carrying him. That was why she was here. Not to prove she belonged, but because silence had become unbearable. She needed to finish what he had started. The next test came without warning. Midnight drills, cold surf, instructors screaming as recruits crawled through freezing water with logs on their shoulders. The ocean clawed at them, tearing heat from their bodies. Men cursed, teeth chattering. Some collapsed, shivering too violently to rise. Reyes held the log with 3 others. Her knees buckled under the weight. The salt burned her eyes. She thought her body might shatter. But then she remembered his voice. "Pain is proof you're still alive. Use it." She grit her teeth and lifted, inch by inch. The log rose again, balanced on their shoulders. Her teammates groaned, but they moved, step by step, back to the sand. The instructors barked. The log dropped. Recruits collapsed, coughing, spitting seawater. But Reyes stayed on her feet, chest heaving, eyes forward. For the first time, the others looked at her differently. Not admiration. Not yet, but confusion, because she should have quit by now, she should have broken, but she hadn't. And Commander Harlow, he didn't just look, he stared. That tattoo burned in his mind. That silence, that fire in her eyes, he'd seen it before. Long ago, in people who weren't supposed to exist anymore. After drills, he caught her alone. "Reyes," he said, voice low, "why are you here?" She looked at him, rain dripping from her hair, eyes dark and steady. And again, she said nothing. He almost snapped, almost demanded answers, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't arrogance, it was grief. So he let her walk past. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He poured whiskey into a paper cup and stared at the photo on his desk, black and white, edges frayed. A team, young once, standing in shadows with no insignia. And there in the corner was the man with the tattoo. The man whose face looked so much like hers. He whispered into the empty room, "Who are you really?" And in the silence that followed, the waves outside seemed to answer. But Reyes didn't hear. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, every muscle aching. And still, her mind burned with a single thought. They thought she was just another recruit. They thought silence was weakness. They thought the tattoo was just ink. They didn't know. Not yet. Why did they push her so hard? Hell Week was designed to break people. The sleepless nights, the endless cold, the grinding tests of endurance. It wasn't just training. It was erosion. They stripped away everything until only the raw truth of a person remained. And for Reyes, the truth was all the others cared about. They wanted her gone. By the third night, the air was icy enough to make steel brittle. Recruits crawled through mud under barbed wire, lungs rattling, hands trembling. Every inch forward felt like dragging a mountain. That was when it happened, subtle at first. A boot slipped into her path, knocking her face first into the sludge. A hand accidentally shoved her shoulder as she tried to crawl. Little things masked as chaos but deliberate. They didn't just want her to quit. They wanted her humiliated. She spat mud from her mouth, blinked against the stinging grit, and kept moving. No words, no retaliation, just the steady pull forward, knees sinking deeper into the filth. The instructors barked over megaphones, driving them harder, but Reyes barely heard. Her mind had shrunk to a pinpoint, one knee, then the other, one breath, then the next. Her father's voice was with her, louder than the jeers. Never stop moving forward. Not for them, not for anyone, only for you. She reached the end of the crawl, face cut, hands raw, and pulled herself up. Behind her, the laughter started again. But one person wasn't laughing. From the observation tower, Commander Harlow watched every shove, every trip, every petty cruelty. He should have stepped in, should have stopped it, but he didn't. He wanted to see, wanted to know if she'd break. And she hadn't. By dawn, their bodies had become shells. The ocean dragged them under, instructors forced them to paddle makeshift rafts, and still no sleep. Men stronger than Reyes collapsed, shaking, whispering that they were done. But she kept moving. That was when sabotage turned into something darker. During a night swim, recruits pushed into black water with only glow sticks to guide them. One candidate lost his grip on the raft. Reyes felt the sudden shove. She was under, salt flooding her nose, lungs seizing. The raft pulled away. No one reached for her. The ocean swallowed her whole. For a heartbeat, panic clawed at her chest. The black water closed around her, pressing like a fist. Her body screamed to thrash, to fight. But she didn't. She let herself sink, let the cold grip her, and in that silence she remembered. Her father's voice again, not soft this time, sharp, commanding. You're not drowning, you're hiding. The ocean doesn't kill you unless you fear it. Her body went still, her heart slowed. She counted the seconds, and then when her chest was on fire, she kicked. Hard, smooth, breaking upward, slicing through the black until she exploded back into air. She didn't scream, didn't call for help, she just swam. Stroke by stroke, she closed the distance to the raft. When she reached it, her face was pale, her breath ragged, but her grip was steel. She hauled herself up and locked eyes with the recruit who'd shoved her. He froze, caught in the stare. She said nothing, just sat on the edge, water dripping from her hair, eyes burning through the night. The others didn't laugh, not this time. When they hit the shore again, Harlow was there. He studied her like a man staring into the past. He'd seen those eyes before, that steadiness. Not in any recruit, not in any soldier, only in those who'd been through something darker than training. He remembered a mission in Berlin decades ago. A safe house breach. The man with the viper tattoo had been hit, bleeding out, but his eyes had been the same, steady, unbroken, like he'd already made peace with pain. And now those eyes stared back at him from Reyes. Harlow's jaw tightened. He had to know. Later, when the recruits collapsed in the barracks, Reyes remained awake. Her body ached, blisters burning, salt still in her lungs, but her mind wouldn't rest. She reached into the lining of her duffel and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. Old, frayed, the kind of thing the Navy would never allow in uniform. She unfolded it carefully in the dim light. It was a patch, black, edges tattered, bearing the faint outline of the same viper wrapped around 5 stars. She stared at it for a long time. Her thumb brushed across it like it was sacred. It was all she had left of him. The next morning the recruits lined up again. Eyes hollow, bodies trembling, the instructors barked. More punishment, more drills, more ocean. Reyes pulled on her boots, still damp, and fell into line. The recruit who had shoved her into the water the night before wouldn't meet her eyes. The laughter had stopped, replaced by something else. Unease. Because she wasn't breaking, she wasn't quitting. If anything, she was becoming stronger. And the commander knew it. That afternoon, Harlow summoned her to his office. The recruits whispered about it, eager for gossip. Maybe she was being kicked out. Maybe she'd finally failed. But when she stepped inside, the air was different, heavy. He didn't shout, didn't lecture. He just pointed at the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. His eyes lingered on her arm, on the ink half hidden under rolled sleeves. Then he leaned forward. "That tattoo, where did you get it?" Her face didn't move, not an inch. He tried again. "Do you even know what it means?" Silence. Harlow's voice hardened. "I knew a man who carried that mark decades ago. He saved my life. He died for it. That tattoo isn't for recruits. It isn't for anyone anymore. So I'll ask you again, who are you?" For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not arrogance, but grief. Her lips parted just slightly. "He was my father." The words were soft, but they hit like a rifle crack. Harlow froze. The room seemed to tilt. Memories rushed back, gunfire, smoke, a man bleeding out on a floor, gripping his arm with that same tattoo. Her father. Harlow's throat tightened. What was his name? But Reyes shook her head. The silence returned, heavier now. "I can't," she whispered. And just like that, the wall slammed back up. Harlow sat there, staring, his chest heavy. He could order her to speak, could drag the truth out, but something told him it wouldn't matter. Whatever story was behind her eyes, it was bound tighter than orders, deeper than fear. When she stood to leave, he didn't stop her. But he knew one thing now. She wasn't just another recruit. She was the ghost of a man he'd buried decades ago. And somehow, she had come back to finish what he'd started. How much could a body take before it broke? That was the unspoken question of Hell Week. By the 4th day, most recruits weren't running anymore, they were staggering. By the 5th, they were ghosts, eyes sunken, hands trembling, minds hollowed out by exhaustion. The instructors pushed harder. The surf drills doubled. The logs grew heavier. The crawling, the carrying, the endless screaming commands, it all blurred into a single, grinding blur of pain. For Reyes, every step hurt. Her boots were soaked again, blisters raw. Her muscles screamed with every lift. Her throat burned with salt and sand. She felt her body teetering on the edge, ready to collapse. But she kept moving. Not because she wanted to win, not because she wanted to prove herself, but because quitting wasn't an option. Not for her, not for what that tattoo meant. The others still mocked her, not as loudly as before, but enough. One recruit in particular, a broad-shouldered bruiser named Kincaid, made it his mission to remind her she didn't belong. He shoved her during log drills, muttered insults when instructors couldn't hear, laughed when she faltered. "You're dead weight," he spat one night during a raft carry. "We're drowning because of you." She said nothing, just shouldered the log again, body trembling, eyes fixed forward. But then something shifted. On the 6th night, the instructors forced them into the surf again. Cold, black water, rafts above their heads, knees buckling in the sand. They moved as a unit or they failed as a unit. Kincaid, who had mocked her the loudest, staggered. His face went pale. His arms shook violently, refusing to hold the weight. He dropped, collapsing into the surf, the raft slipping sideways. The whole team stumbled with him. The instructors roared. Failure meant punishment, more drills, more pain. But Reyes didn't let it fall. With a guttural sound that tore from her chest, she slid under the raft, braced her shoulders, and lifted. Alone. The weight crushed her spine, pressed fire into her lungs, but she held it, long enough for the others to recover, long enough to keep them from punishment. Kincaid stared up at her, salt water in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't laugh. By the time they dragged the raft to shore, something had changed. The smirks faded, the whispers died. She was still the girl, still silent, still carrying a mark no one understood. But now they couldn't deny her. She had carried them. Even Kincaid looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. Commander Harlow saw it all. Watched the way she'd shouldered a weight she should never have been able to bear. He should have been proud, but instead, he was troubled. Because he recognized it, that relentlessness, that refusal to let others fall, even when it meant breaking yourself. It was the same thing her father had carried, the same thing that had gotten him killed. That night when the recruits collapsed into the barracks, Harlow didn't go home. He stayed in his office, lights low, whiskey untouched. He keyed into the classified archives, a place he hadn't dared enter in years. The system was slow, deliberately buried under layers of red tape. He entered old credentials, old clearance codes. Some still worked. Others had been deactivated. But eventually, the screen flickered to life with files that hadn't been opened in decades. Operation Phoenix. The name glared back at him in red. He opened it. His chest tightened. Images filled the screen. Black and white photos. Training facilities hidden in forests. Men and women younger than he remembered, their faces hard with discipline. Among them, her father, the man with the viper tattoo. Harlow leaned closer, his pulse quickening. He scrolled through mission reports. Berlin, Moscow, classified operations with no official record. He saw his own name buried in the margins. And then one line that made him stop. Subject Reyes, status deceased. His hand froze over the mouse. The report was dated before her birth. Deceased. But here was his daughter, alive, standing in the mud, carrying rafts on her shoulders. His chest ached as the truth clawed at him. They hadn't just buried the program. They had buried its people, scrubbed them from history, even their families erased. And now one had come back. Back in the barracks, Reyes lay awake. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't rest. She kept seeing Kincaid's face, eyes wide as she lifted the raft for him. She didn't care about his respect. She didn't want it, but part of her father's voice whispered in her ear. Never leave a man behind, even if he doesn't deserve you. She hated that she'd listened, hated that she'd carried him, but she couldn't help it. It was who she was. The next morning, something strange happened. Kincaid didn't laugh. He didn't mock. When she laced her boots, still damp, he didn't touch them. When they ran, he didn't shove her. Instead, he slowed once, just enough for her to keep pace. A gesture so small it might have meant nothing, but she noticed. Respect wasn't spoken. It was earned in silence. And Reyes had earned it. Still, the others whispered. Still, they wondered. Still, the question hung in the air, heavier than the logs on their shoulders. Who was she? Commander Harlow had the same question, but he was closer to the answer than they knew. The more he read, the more the weight crushed him. Her father hadn't just been a soldier. He had been part of something darker, something erased from history. Operation Phoenix wasn't just training. It was experimentation, pushing soldiers past their limits, breaking them and rebuilding them. Only a handful survived. And the ones who did carried scars deeper than flesh. He remembered her father's eyes, the way they never blinked in the face of chaos, the way they saw through people like glass. Now those eyes belonged to her. He poured whiskey into a cup but didn't drink. His hands shook too much. If she survived Hell Week, if she made it through training, what then? What would it mean to have her among them? And more terrifying, What if the same fate awaited her? The next night the ocean roared louder than ever. The instructors pushed them harder, screaming into megaphones, demanding more, punishing every slip. The recruits were breaking, collapsing. But Reyes kept moving. Not fast, not strong, but steady, always steady. Until one moment changed everything. During a night march, weighed down with packs, the team hit the sandbar. The tide surged faster than expected. Water rushed high, pulling at their legs, threatening to drag them under. One recruit slipped. The current caught him, pulling him into the dark. Reyes didn't hesitate. She dropped her pack, dove head first, and disappeared into the black water. The others froze, instructors shouted, but she was already gone. Seconds stretched like hours. Then her head broke the surface. Her arms locked around the recruit's chest, dragging him against the tide. Her legs kicked with desperate strength. She fought the ocean like she'd been born in it. Finally, she pulled him to shore, collapsing beside him, chest heaving, hands trembling. The recruit coughed, choking alive. Reyes lay beside him, eyes closed, body shaking. She didn't speak, didn't ask for thanks. She just breathed as though dragging him out had dragged out a piece of herself too. The others stared, silent, no laughter, no mockery. For the first time, respect was there. Not reluctant, not half-hearted, real. Commander Harlow stood at the edge of the surf, water foaming at his boots. He watched her, chest tight, memories flooding his mind. Her father had saved him once in the same way, dragged him from a kill zone in Berlin, risked everything, paid with his life. And now his daughter was carrying the same weight. The cycle hadn't broken. Harlow turned away, his voice low, almost a whisper. God help her. Why did saving one life change everything? The next morning the recruits looked at her differently, not with open admiration. They weren't built for that. SEAL candidates didn't hand out praise, but the silence in the chow hall told the truth. The jokes were gone, the smirks, the whispered bets about when she'd quit. Kincaid, who once shoved her face first into mud, didn't meet her eyes. When she sat down, he shifted, giving her space. No one laughed, no one dared. Respect, she realized, didn't arrive in applause. It arrived in silence. She ate slowly, body still bruised from the tide, lungs raw from the salt water. The recruit she dragged out of the current limped past her tray and muttered something too quiet for the others to hear. Thanks. Just one word, but enough. Her hands trembled under the table, not from exhaustion, though she was drowning in it, but from something else. A crack in her silence, a reminder that she wasn't made of stone. Her father would have told her not to get attached, not to let their respect matter. But she couldn't help it. It mattered, more than she wanted to admit. That night when the barracks went dark, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the recruit's face in the water, pale with fear, his lungs choking on the tide. She remembered her father, bleeding out on a cold floor, whispering his last words into her ear before the light left his eyes. You'll carry it after me. Carry what? She still didn't know. But she carried it anyway. Commander Harlow, meanwhile, didn't sleep at all. He was still in his office, eyes burning, files spread like ashes across his desk. The classified archives went deeper than he expected. Layers of redacted lines, black bars across names and dates, but he knew how to read between them, knew the language of buried sins. He found the name again, Reyes. Not the daughter, the father. His service record was spotless on paper, but behind the black bars, Harlow saw the truth. Her father hadn't just been part of Operation Phoenix. He had been one of its architects, a test subject and a leader. He survived the program's brutality, carried the tattoo as a mark of those who endured. But then came the missions. Black sites in Eastern Europe, ghost operations in cities that denied their presence, places where soldiers disappeared and governments stayed silent. And then the final report. Status terminated, cause compromise. Harlow's hand tightened on the file. Terminated. That word didn't mean death by combat. It meant something worse. It meant betrayal. It meant someone inside the program had decided Reyes was no longer an asset. But Harlow knew the truth. He had been there. It wasn't compromise, it was sacrifice. Her father had saved him in Berlin, dragged him out of fire, held the line, gave his life so Harlow could live. He wasn't compromised. He was loyal, loyal to the end. So why had the files erased him? Why had they erased his family? Harlow closed the folder, chest heavy. His reflection in the window looked older than he felt, more broken. And now his daughter was here, walking the same path, carrying the same mark. He couldn't let it happen again. Back in training, the days blurred. Reyes ran, crawled, lifted, bled. She failed tests, succeeded in others, always silent, always steady. The recruits no longer mocked her. Some even shielded her when instructors weren't looking, lifting the extra weight when her frame buckled, covering her flank in the water. Not because they pitied her, but because she had proven something deeper than strength. She didn't quit. In a place where most did, that was everything. And still she stayed silent. When they asked why she never spoke, she shook her head. When they asked about the tattoo, she covered it. But Harlow knew the truth now, or enough of it, and the weight of it crushed him. One night after drills, he found himself walking the edge of the surf. The waves foamed against his boots. The sky above was dark, stars faint behind clouds. He remembered the last time he'd been in water like this. Berlin, years ago, crawling through a flooded underpass with bullets snapping overhead. Reyes's father had been beside him, eyes steady, voice calm. "Keep moving, Harlow. The tide doesn't kill you if you don't fight it." And then gunfire, blood, a sacrifice he never forgot. Now his daughter carried the same fire, the same silence. He whispered into the waves, though no one was there to hear, "I won't let them bury you too." But he didn't know how. The next morning, Hell Week ended. Recruits staggered to formation, faces hollow, uniforms tattered. Some didn't make it, beds empty, names already struck from rosters. But Reyes stood there, shoulders squared, eyes forward. She had survived. The instructors didn't cheer, they didn't congratulate, they simply nodded. Surviving wasn't victory, it was permission to keep going. But for Reyes, it was something more. For the first time when she stood in line, she wasn't alone. The others flanked her, no longer with smirks or whispers, but with quiet respect. And Harlow, watching from the tower, felt his chest tighten. Because he knew respect wasn't enough to protect her. The deeper she went into this world, the closer she came to the truth her father had died to bury. And when she found it, would it destroy her? That night Reyes sat alone by the docks, staring at the horizon. The ocean whispered against the pylons, cold and endless. She pulled the frayed patch from her pocket again, the viper and 5 stars. Her thumb traced the lines. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered something no one could hear. "I'm still carrying it." And behind her in the shadows, Commander Harlow watched, his jaw set, his fists clenched. He had to make a choice. Tell her the truth. Or protect her from it. Either way, the silence wouldn't last forever. How could silence be louder than gunfire? That was the question on the range. The recruits lined up, rifles in hand, instructors barking cadence. The first week after Hell Week was always the same, transitioning broken bodies into hardened soldiers, testing who still had clarity in their minds. Most hands shook, trigger discipline faltered, bullets scattered downrange, missing steel, missing paper. But Reyes. Her body was wrecked, but her hands were steady. She raised her weapon, breathed once and fired. The steel plate sang. The others turned. Another breath, another shot. The steel rang again. Her movements were mechanical but not rehearsed, not the clumsy mimicry of a recruit learning for the first time. This was something deeper, muscle memory, the kind that wasn't taught in classrooms, the kind inherited from ghosts. Commander Harlow's jaw tightened. He'd seen shooters like that before, rare, deadly. Her father had been one. But Reyes never looked smug, never celebrated the hits. She simply lowered her weapon and waited. The instructors didn't comment, didn't praise, but their silence was telling. The others noticed, respect deepened. The girl they once mocked now outshot them all. And yet she didn't gloat, didn't even smile. She just carried the silence forward. The drills escalated, close quarters combat, room clearing, tactical coordination. Recruits barked orders, stumbled through doorways, argued when their plans fell apart. Reyes stayed quiet. Until one exercise when the squad froze inside a mock kill house. Smoke filled the room. Instructors fired blanks from hidden corners. The recruits panicked, shouting over each other, tripping in the chaos. That was when Reyes moved. No words, no orders, just action. She slipped low, swept the room in silence, weapon steady, eyes sharp. She didn't flinch at the noise, didn't rush. She flowed, smooth, surgical. Bang, bang, targets dropped in sequence. By the time the smoke cleared, she had cleared the room alone. The others stared, breathing hard, shame burning in their eyes. She lowered her weapon, sweat dripping, chest rising, but her expression never changed. One instructor muttered under his breath, "She's been here before." But she hadn't, not officially. Commander Harlow's gaze burned from the observation deck. He remembered her father in Moscow, room after room cleared with the same quiet precision, the same steady fire. It wasn't possible. And yet it was. That night in the barracks, the whispers started again, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were awe. "Did you see her grouping? She didn't miss. She's different." Reyes lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The whispers pressed against her ears, the weight of their eyes heavier than any log she had carried. Different. The word cut deeper than mockery ever had, because they were right. She was different. She closed her eyes and saw her father again, tracing the tattoo on his arm. "They'll never understand us, Mija. We're not built like them." But was that a blessing or a curse? Harlow couldn't rest. He dug deeper into the archives, searching for pieces the black bars couldn't hide. He found after-action reports, cleaned up for official review, but the truth bled through. Reyes's father hadn't just been a soldier. He had been something more. Leader of a unit that was never named, missions that were never recorded. And at the end, betrayed by his own command. Left to die, erased from history so the program could vanish with him. Harlow clenched his fists. He remembered it all, the blood, the silence, the way the man had looked at him before the final push. "If I fall, carry it." And now his daughter carried it. During survival drills, the recruits were dropped in marshland with nothing but canteens and knives. Some panicked. Some shouted at the instructors for guidance. Reyes moved like she'd been there 100 times. She found water where they saw mud, built fire where they saw only damp wood, snared food where they starved. The others followed her without question. Kincaid, once her harshest enemy, watched her slice reeds into cordage and muttered under his breath, "Where the hell did you learn this?" She didn't answer, just handed him the cord, steady as ever. By the end of the exercise, when the instructors came to collect them, it wasn't the loudest recruit who stood at the front. It was her. Not because she demanded it, but because the others had fallen in behind her, naturally. Leadership without words. Harlow saw it, felt it in his chest. This wasn't just her father's shadow. It was her. But that scared him more than anything. Because shadows faded, but she was burning brighter, too bright. And the brighter she burned, the more attention she would draw from people who had buried her father. The question haunted him now. Should he stop her before it was too late, or let her become what she was meant to be, even if it destroyed her? Back in the barracks, Reyes sat on her bunk, sewing another tear in her sock. The others had finally stopped mocking her. Some even sat close, watching her hands work. Kincaid broke the silence. "You saved my life twice." She didn't look up, didn't answer. But he didn't press. Because he knew now, words weren't her language. And yet, as the barracks grew quiet, she whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'm not him." The words hung in the dark, fragile, breaking the silence for the first time in weeks. And though no one else heard, Harlow, walking past outside, caught the whisper through the thin walls. His chest tightened, because he knew exactly who him was. And the truth he carried was tearing him apart. How long could silence hold back the truth? Commander Harlow had asked himself that question every night since Hell Week ended. He saw her on the range, saw her in the kill house, saw her in the marshes. Each time her skill was sharper, more precise, more undeniable. And each time his chest grew heavier. Because the higher she climbed, the closer she came to the same edge her father had fallen from. The whispers had already begun. Instructors at briefings leaned in close, muttering behind closed doors. "She's different." Where, she learned that. Not normal for a recruit. Higher command would notice soon. And when they did, they'd ask the same questions Harlow had. Who is she? That evening, after another grueling set of combat drills, he found her alone. She was sitting at the edge of the pier, boots dangling above the black water, watching the waves slam against pylons. The others were asleep, or pretending to be, but she was awake as always. Harlow approached, boots heavy against the wood. She didn't look back, but he knew she'd heard him. For a long time he said nothing. He just stood there, staring at the water with her. The salt stung his nose, the same way it had in Berlin all those years ago. Finally, he sat beside her. "Your father saved my life." Her head turned slowly. Her eyes widened just slightly, but she didn't speak. Harlow's throat was dry. The words had been buried for decades, but now they clawed their way out. "Moscow, Berlin, places you'll never find in history books. We were ghosts, and he was the best of us, until they decided he was." Her jaw tightened. He saw it, the way she wanted to ask, the way she wanted to demand everything. But she held it back, always holding it back. "He didn't betray anyone," Harlow said, voice breaking with old anger. "They said he was compromised, they lied, he gave everything, and then they erased him." Her hand trembled against the wood. "And us," she whispered. Harlow's chest clenched, the first time he had ever heard her voice without command, fragile, broken. "They erased us too." He wanted to reach for her but stopped himself. His hands were too stained, too heavy with the past. "I don't know why they buried you," he admitted. "But I know this. If they find out who you are, they'll bury you again. And this time I won't be able to stop it." Her eyes met his, dark, steady, filled with grief that had never healed. "I don't care," she said. The words were soft, but they struck him like thunder. "I didn't come here to be safe. I came here because he couldn't finish what he started, and I will." Harlow's breath caught. There it was, the fire, not her father's fire, hers. He wanted to tell her everything. The missions, the betrayal, the night her father had bled out with the viper tattoo burning against his skin. But he couldn't. Not yet. Because footsteps were coming. Two men in dark uniforms, higher command, stepped out of the shadows. Their voices were low, clipped. "Commander Harlow." He rose stiff. "Sir." They glanced at Reyes, then back at him. "She's exceptional," one of them said flatly. "Too exceptional, that grouping on the range, that clearance drill, the survival exercise, you've seen it." Harlow's stomach sank. "Yes," he said carefully. The other officer's eyes narrowed. Where did she learn it? Harlow paused, Talent, discipline. The man's lip curled. Discipline doesn't explain instinct like that. Reyes sat still, eyes forward, listening without flinching. The officer leaned closer. We need to know who she is, what she is. Harlow's jaw clenched. She's a recruit, that's all you need to know. The men exchanged a glance, not for long. And then they were gone, their boots fading into the night. Reyes finally turned to him. They know. He swallowed, not yet, but they will. Her voice was steady, colder now. Then we move faster. He stared at her, faster toward what? Her eyes didn't waver, toward whatever he died for. Harlow felt the weight of her father's ghost pressing between them. The same fire, the same silence. But this time it was burning in someone younger, someone the world hadn't erased yet. Listen to me, he said, voice low, urgent. You don't have to carry his war, you don't have to be him. Her lips pressed tight. For a moment he thought she might stay silent. But then barely a whisper. I'm not him, I'm what they made him leave behind. The words gutted him. Because she was right. The next morning drills resumed. Weapons, tactics, long hours under sun and sand. The recruits moved differently now, tighter, sharper, and Reyes was no longer the outcast. Kincaid barked orders during a movement drill, but his eyes kept flicking to her. When he stumbled, he didn't hide it. He let her cover his flank, and when the drill ended, he didn't smirk. He simply nodded. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't loyalty, it was something rarer, trust. Reyes felt it even if she didn't want to. It burned in her chest, the same way the tide had burned her lungs when she dragged him from the water. She didn't ask for their trust, but she couldn't deny it mattered. That night she unfolded the patch again, the viper and 5 stars, and held it in her hand. For the first time, she wondered if carrying it wasn't just about her father anymore. Maybe it was about all of them. The ones who had mocked, the ones who had doubted, the ones who now followed her in silence. Harlow watched from the shadows. He wanted to tell her the rest, wanted to give her the truth. But higher command was already circling. And if they saw in her what he did, if they confirmed what he feared, they wouldn't let her graduate. They'd erase her. Just like they erased him. Why was her name missing? The recruits stood in formation on graduation week. Sunlight glared against polished boots, rifles at rest, uniforms stiff with starch. Each face bore the scars of Hell Week, the cuts from obstacle courses, the bruises of combat drills. Names were called, one by one. Candidates stepped forward, saluted, claimed their place among the few who had survived. But when the list reached Reyes, silence. Her chest tightened. She stood rigid, eyes fixed forward, but the absence was deafening. The others noticed. Kincaid's jaw clenched. A ripple of unease spread down the line. Commander Harlow's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. He didn't look at her, couldn't. Because he knew. Higher command had decided. She wasn't going to graduate. Not because she'd failed, not because she hadn't endured, but because of who she was. Because of the tattoo. Because of the ghost she carried. The ceremony ended. Cheers erupted, caps tossed, hands shook. But Reyes stood still, her name never called. The recruits broke formation. Some celebrated. Others fell silent, stealing glances at her. Even Kincaid, the one who had mocked her most, walked past without a word. His silence said everything. She turned slowly, boots heavy against the pavement, and walked away. Harlow followed. He caught her at the edge of the pier, the same place he'd found her so many nights before. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the horizon, where the sea bled into sky. They erased me, she said softly. Her voice cracked, but her posture didn't. They did, Harlow admitted. His throat burned, just like they erased him. Finally she turned. Her eyes weren't wet, they were fire. Then why did I survive all of it? Why carry the weight? Why suffer their laughs, their shoves, their silence, if it doesn't matter? Harlow's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it mattered. He wanted to tell her she had already changed everything. But the truth clawed at him. In the eyes of higher command, she was nothing, just another name to erase. Unless the sound of boots behind them cut through the air. Kincaid and then another recruit, and another. Within moments half the class stood there. No words, no smirks, just silence. They stood beside her. One of them, the same man she had dragged from the tide, finally spoke. "She belongs here." Harlow's breath caught. The others nodded. No one cheered, no one shouted, just steady, quiet agreement. Reyes' throat ached. For weeks their silence had been her prison. Now it was her shield. Harlow stepped forward, his voice low, steady. "You survived more than any of them, more than most of us ever did. If they won't write your name on their list, then I will." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pen, pulled out the roster, and in a moment that broke every regulation he'd sworn to uphold, he wrote her name. Reyes. His hand shook as he signed beneath it, not as commander, not as instructor, but as the man her father had once saved. When he looked up, her eyes glistened, not with tears, with something harder. Trust. The next morning, higher command called him in. Their voices were cold, their questions sharp. "You altered the roster. She doesn't belong. She's dangerous." Harlow's jaw tightened. "She belongs more than any of them." The room went still. "Are you willing to stake your career on that?" one of them asked. Harlow thought of Berlin, thought of the man bleeding out with the viper tattoo, thought of the daughter who now carried it, silent, unbroken. "Yes," he said. The silence that followed was suffocating, but he didn't flinch. When he left that room, he knew the cost. He knew the whispers would follow. He knew the weight of defiance. But he also knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. That evening, Reyes stood on the pier again, patch in hand. The viper and 5 stars, her father's mark. She thought of him, thought of the silence he'd carried, thought of the silence she had carried. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in it. Boots scuffed behind her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. "You still carrying it?" Harlow asked quietly. She nodded, "Always." He studied her, the waves reflected in his eyes. "Then carry it your way, not his, not mine, yours." For the first time her lips curved, just slightly. Not a smile, but something close. The tide crashed against the pier, endless, unbroken. And the silence between them,